Hello imbibers, a very warm welcome to all of you. Once again we are here with the another topic from the sexual reproduction in flowering plant, which is the most important topic of this chapter is the double fertilization. Yes, which is a unique feature of the angiosperm. But how do this double fertilization takes place, we're going to study in this particular lecture. Yes, so let me start the today's session. Before, let me introduce you to myself. I am Anam. I'll be your biology expert for the session 2023 and 2024, and we're going to discuss all the amazing and interesting chapters related to the biology. Yes, so children, once again, like we have been discussing all this while about the sexual reproduction in flowering plants, this is the another, and once again I'm going to tell you, this is the most important topic of the sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So please be very attentive and listen very carefully how these events are taking place, what is basically making a angiosperm standing out of the other particular plants. Yes, so moving forward, let's see what we have in our today's session. Yes, so children, this particular chapter, which is the sexual reproduction in flowering plants, and these are the few topics which would be covered in the flowering plants. Some of them we have already covered and some are yet to be covered. So the topics would be already covered has been related to the reproductive system, male, female reproductive part of the flowers, accessory, pistil, megasporangium, embryo sac, megasporangiogenesis, microsporogenesis, pollination, agents of pollination, and some outbreeding devices. A lot have been already discussed from this chapter. Yes, today we're going to discuss about the double fertilization, which is the another topic of this particular chapter, and we're going to later discuss about the post-fertilization events, seed and fruit formation, and upon opcomixis and polyembryony. And tomorrow I think we're going to have this practice session. Each and every particular topic we're going to have the practice session about it. So please do attend our practice session also, and through our Embibe app, which is absolutely give you an amazing experience for directly attempting the question. Yes, which is not available over here in the YouTube. You can join us on the Embibe app and basically say answer questions directly from your laptop or your phone. So let's see what we have in today's lecture. Today's the concept which would be covered in this particular session would be related to the pollen tube germination. How exactly when the pollen, the stigma is being received, on the stigma receives the pollen, how the pollen tube germination takes place. We're going to discuss about porogamy, chelazogamy, mesogamy, the kind how this pollen tube is entering into the egg cell. All will be discussed. Yes, and the last, after it enters, how the fertilization taking place, and the last, how the triple fusion is going to take place. We're going to discuss all of these in today's session. Moving forward, children, next let's have a quick recap what we have studied in the previous lecture. We have discussed about the pollination. Yes, we have discussed about what the agents of pollination and pollination. And what is pollination? A pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma via agents. Yes, it could be biotic agent, it could be abiotic agents. What are the abiotic agents? The wind, the air, the water, all are abiotic agents. And we're talking about the biotic agents, which are the living agents. It could be insects, it could be bats, it could be birds, yes, it could be snails, yes, any particular living organisms which help in the transferring of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma is called the agent of pollination. Yes, so children, pollination is important for the sexual reproduction which takes place in the plants. Yes, after the pollination, if the pollen is compatible with the stigma, the pollen tube will form, and if it is not compatible with the stigma will reject that particular pollen grain. So children, this is all we have studied about the pollination. So if you have missed this session regarding the pollination and the agents of pollination, it is always there on your dashboard of the Embibe app. Yes, you can go and watch them whenever you want to know about the pollination and the agents of pollination, because that is also this chapter from your board examination point of view and your NEET examination point of view is already very important. So please go and learn thoroughly about this. Moving forward, children, let's start our today's session. What is this? So children, we have been discussing about what is pollination. Pollination have been already discussed in detail. But what happens once the pollination is done? What will happen once the pollen grain is reached towards the stigma from the anther through any agent? yes, be it any air, water, wind, it could be insects to the birds. Yes, what the work is done by the agent, the pollination has taken place, the transfer of pollen grain, the pollen grain has landed on the stigma. But what next? What will happen next after the pollen grain has landed on the stigma? Let's see what happens exactly. Yes, it will germinate. Yes, if the stigma is compatible with that particular pollen grain, it will lead to the formation of the pollen tube. Otherwise, the stigma will reject the pollen grain. So, let's see, the moment the pollen grain reach to the stigma, what happens if it's compatible? Yes, what will happen? The pollen tube germination will take place. Yes, the pollen tube germination will take place as soon as the pollen grain land on the stigma of the carpel. Yes, the pollen grain which is shed at the 2-celled or 3-cell stage. This is, we have already discussed about what is a 2-cell stage and what is a 3-cell stage of the pollen grain. Yes, so the pollen grain, when it is shed at the 2-cell stage and the 3-cell stage, it will basically go and land on the stigma. The pollen tube absorbs moisture from the stigma and germinates to form a pollen tube through the germ pore. If you remember, I have told you when we were discussing about the structure of the pollen that on the outer side of the pollen there are germ pores. Yes, those germ pores are responsible for the pollen tube formation when the pollen is landing on the stigma. So, once the pollen grain lands on the stigma, the germ pore which are present on the outer membrane, outer layer of the pollen will give rise to a pollen tube formation. Yes, what this pollen tube has? The pollen tube carry your male gametes which will reach the ovule. So, if you remember children, if you remember, there was a vegetative cell, there was a generative cell. Yes, your vegetative cell, your generative cell, and there were 2 male gametes. Yes, there were 2 male gametes in the pollen grain. So, once the pollen tube formation has taken place, it will take those ovules towards the egg cell. It will take those ovules towards the ovary. Yes, where the ovules are present, where the egg cells are present for the fusion of the gametes, for the fusion of the male gametes and the egg cell. Yes, so this pollen tube carries the male gametes and reaches towards the ovule and reaches the ovule. After this pollen tube formation, which will absorb the moisture, from the stigma for the germination, this pollen tube will form because the pollen will absorb the moisture from the stigma, and the pollen tube, when reaches to the ovule, the pollen tube will enters the ovule by a, if you remember when we discussed about the whole structure of the ovule, there was a micropylar region, there was a chalazal end, yes, and there was a synergids, there was a filiform apparatus. We have discussed all of this, so I am not going to repeat that again. If you want to know again what is filiform apparatus, what are synergids, you can go and check out the megasporangium when we have discussed about it. So, right now you know there is a micropylar end and there is synergids via filiform apparatus. What is a filiform apparatus? You know, if you remember the filiform apparatus, what it will do? It will guide the entry. It will guide the entry. Yes, and there are synergid cells. Yes, there are 2 synergid cells and 1 egg cell, if you remember the whole structure of the megasporangium. So, children, after the pollen tube has reaches towards the ovule, it will go via micropylar region. Yes, this is your ovule, this is your chalazal end, this is your micropylar end, these are your synergid cells, and this is your egg cell. This is your egg cell. These 2 are your synergid cell. Yes, synergid cell, and there is a filiform apparatus over here which will guide the entry of the pollen tube so it could enter into the ovule. Yes, let's see how is basically this is taking place. Yes, can you see clearly? It will be visible over here. Let's see how the pollen tube basically moving towards the ovule. Yes, so the moment pollen landing on the stigma, yes, clearly shows this is how the pollen tube formation will take place after the pollen grain has landed on the stigma. Yes, keep seeing it. As you can see, the pollen tube formation will take place. This is how your pollen tube has taken place, the pollen tube formation. These are your male gametes. Yes. So, children, continuously this is how the pollen tube formation will take place in the stigma. This is what I was talking about, children. Yes, this is what I was talking about. This is your, if you see clearly, children, this is your pollen tube entry. This is your micropylar end. This is synergist. These are synergid cell. This is your egg cell. This is your polar nuclei or the central cell. So, after the pollen tube has reached towards the ovule, it will go and fuse. Yes, it will go and fuse with the, since there were two male gametes, please remember the pollen grain has two male gametes. Both of them will fertilize with the cells present in the ovule. Which cells? We are going to see that. Talking about the entry of the pollen tube via ovule, what will happen after that? Once the stigma accepts the pollen tube germinate and enters in three ways. Yes, this is what I am going to talk about. There are three entry points for the pollen tube. There are three gates to enter into ovule, and which particular way it uses, it is going to be defined as that only. So, the very first is the porogamy. Very simple. If simply the pollen tube is entering through the micropylar end, like this is your egg cell, this is your micropylar end, and this is your chalazal end. Yes, if the pollen tube is entering through the micropylar end, simply it is called the porogamy. Yes, if the pollen tube is entering through the chalazal end, this is the chalazal end of the ovule, it is called chalazogamy. But if the entry of the pollen tube into the ovules occur through the integuments or funicles. What are integuments? The layers. Yes, inner integuments, outer integuments, layers of the ovule. If the pollen tube is entering through this is what you called as mesogamy. Porogamy, entry through the micropylar region. Chalazogamy, entry through the chalazal end. Mesogamy, entry from the integuments or funiculus. So, these are the three entry points of the pollen tube inside the ovule. Yes, this is how the pollen tube enters in three ways inside. Yes, this is how for the fertilization the pollen tube enters into the particular ovule for the fertilization. Porogamy, chalazogamy, mesogamy. These are three entry points of the pollen grain or the pollen tube. Now, what happens? By any method they can enter into this particular ovule. Let's see the moment they have entered, what will happen afterwards. Yes, there is going to be a fusion, there is going to be a double fertilization event. Yes, what is the event? Very simple, children. Two male gamete, and as I said, both of them will fuse with the egg cells. Yes, before that, quick recap of what we have studied. There are three antipodal cells. There is one central cells having two polar nuclei, and there is two synergid cells, and there is one egg cell. This is egg cell, this is central cell. Okay, just giving a quick structure review. So, now understand the double fertilization. What is double fertilization, children? Very simple. A unique event of angiosperms where the fertilization is occurring twice. The reason why we call it as double fertilization is because the fertilization event is taking place twice. Twice the male gamete is fusing with the cells, ovule. Yes, what happened? Two male gamete. One male gamete is going to come and fuse with the egg cell, but the other male gamete will come and fuse with the polar nuclei, or I can write central cell. Yes, when the fusion is occurring between the egg cell and the male gamete, that event you call it as syngamy, and after the fertilization, after the fusion, a zygote will form. After the fertilization, after the fusion, a zygote will form when the egg cell is fused with the male gamete. If another male gamete fuses with the polar nuclei, it will give rise to an endosperm, and the ploidy will be triploid. Yes, and the ploidy will be triploid because two nuclei, two polar nuclei, one male gamete, three. So it is going to be a triploid region. So this is what double fertilization is. Yes children, this is what a double fertilization is. You can see this is how the male gamete moving towards the stigma. You can see yourself. Yes. As soon as he land on the stigma, pollen tube formation has taken place. The moment it reaches towards the egg cell through the micropylar region, it is going to basically have two male gametes. Yes, two male gametes. As you can see, the pollen tube will have two male gametes. Clearly, one will go and fuses with the egg cell. Yes, the one is going to fuse with the egg cell, the other one is going and fusing with the polar nuclei. Absolutely a clear depiction of how the double fertilization is being taking place. Clear? Clear? This is what a double fertilization is. The one male gamete will go and fuse with the egg cell, the other male gamete is going to go and fuse with the central cell, will have polar nuclei which have two nucleus. Clear? So this is what the most important event in the angiospermic family, which is called the double fertilization. But ma'am, what is a triple fusion? What you are calling about the triple fusion? Double fertilization you have seen. Let's see what is about the triple fusion. Yes, what is triple fusion children? As you can see, the male gamete which combines with the two polar nuclei forms a triploid structure which is having ploidy 3n, forms a primary endosperm nucleus. After this fusion, it is called triple fusion. What is triple fusion? When your one male gamete fuses with the two polar nuclei. This is what you calling as triple fusion, and the ploidy will be 3n, which you also called as primary endosperm nucleus. Clear? This cell formed as a result of the fusion of the male gamete and the polar nuclei, and that is why the cell is called primary endosperm cell. This is an endosperm which is a ploidy of 3n. This is a primary endosperm cell. Yes, PEC produces endosperm which provide nutrition to the developing embryo. How the embryo will be formed? After the one male gamete got fused with the egg cell, it is going to convert into what? It is going to convert into a zygote, and eventually zygote is going to develop into an embryo. The moment embryo is being formed, it will basically convert into the nourishment will come from the PEN, which is the endosperm. Yes, so the function of the Endosperm, which is formed because of the event called triple fusion, is to give nourishment to the developing embryo. Clear, everyone? Is it clear? So, the fusion, the triple fusion is only method of creating the endosperm, and this endosperm will have what? This endosperm will give nourishment to the what? This endosperm will give nourishment to the developing embryo after the zygote is basically formed. Yes? So, children, again a quick description, a quick view of how the double fertilization is taking place. You can see this. Yes, this is a male gamete going and fusing with the one with the egg cell, the other with the polar nuclei. So, this is how double fertilization is taking place, and after fertilization, ovule which are present in the ovary will become seed. The seed protects the developing embryo. Yes, the ovules which are present in the ovary will convert into a seed, and a seed will basically protects the developing embryo. So, this is what double fertilization is. This is what the angiospermic family is known for. Yes, they show the double fertilization and triple fusion. What is a double fertilization? When the two male gametes are going to fuse, one with the egg cell, the other with the polar nuclei. While we talk about the triple fusion, that when the other male gamete go and fuses with the central cell which have two polar nuclei, that is what you call triple fusion. Yes. So, this is about the double fertilization. Yes, everyone, this is about the double fertilization. Next, a question for you. We have the synergids helps in, what is the function of the synergid cells? Yes, what is the function of the synergid cells? Yes, the function of the synergid cells is to basically help in the pollen entry into the embryo cell. Very simple. Next question. Connect the correct meaning of PEC to their respective bubbles. What is the correct meaning of PEC? Okay, the correct answer is the primary endosperm nucleus. Yes. So this is all about today's session, children. What we have learned about today's session. Today's session, it is all about the double fertilization. Yes, of course, it is one of the most important features of the angiosperm plants in the angiospermic family, that once the stigma reaches, once the pollen grain reaches towards the stigma, it is basically the pollen will germinate and will form a pollen tube. The pollen tube will carry the two male gametes towards the egg cells and one towards the central cell for the fertilization. A male gamete which fuses with the egg cell will form an zygote, which eventually convert into the embryo, and exactly the male gamete which is basically fusing with the central cell is converting into the endosperm, which nourishes the embryo. Yes, this is the most important thing. This is about the double fertilization. Yes, we're going to have the practice session also related to the double fertilization eventually. Yes, but before you go, children, let me know, this is basically, of course, after this we're going to discuss about the microscopic single cell zygote in a big plant body. We're going to discuss about this also in the coming session. Next, children, is another question related to use. The embryo is developed as a result of, how the embryo is basically formed. The embryo is basically a result of the syngamy. Yes, when the fusion of egg cell and the male gamete is basically taking place, that event is called syngamy. Yes, that event is called syngamy. Next, the fusion of product of secondary nucleus and the male gamete is the primary endosperm nucleus, zygote, secondary nucleus. Yes, the fusion of secondary nucleus is that it is going to form a primary endosperm nucleus. Very simple. PEN is a result of the triple fusion. And the last, children, not the least, this is basically the Embibe app, which you can log in through your phone number or your email ID. What you have to do is just to press the button, go for the school examination CBSE, and basically go for the 12 CBSE. Select your respective language and land on this page. As soon as you click on the home page button, it will go with the Embibe live classes, and these are the Embibe live classes. This is the current topic which is going on. These are the classes for the next 7 days, and these, if you have missed any session, you can always watch the session on the past Embibe classes. You can learn through this app. Yes, it has so many good videos regarding your every topic, your chapters, and every particular subject is available over here. Whether you belong to PCB or PCM or PCMB, everything is basically present over here. Yes, you can practice different questions, you can test yourself, and you see how much you have achieved. Yes, this is like one-stop solution for everything. And children, the another amazing app from the Embibe is the Embibe Lens app, where you can just scan the text. It will highlight everything in the 3D. It will highlight all the keywords and you can see everything in the 3D. We will meet again with the new topic, new session. Please keep imbibing. Take care. Bye-bye.
Keep imbibing. We believe in you.